The Frost Peak Range was not a place that forgave weakness. The mountains rose sharp and cold against the gray sky, their peaks hidden somewhere above the clouds where no human had ever climbed. Snow covered everything, the rocks, the narrow paths, the old pine trees that leaned sideways from years of fighting the wind. In winter, the range became something close to another world entirely. Silent. Frozen. Unforgiving. But tonight the mountains were not silent. From the high ledges of the clan hold, a sound was pouring down the slopes and rolling out across the frozen forest below. It was deep and low and full of something that had no simple name. It moved through the air like a wave, rising and falling, carried by the wind from one valley to the next. Anyone who heard it for the first time would stop walking. Would stand very still. Would feel something tighten in their chest without quite knowing why. The Drake clan of the Frost Peak Range was mourning. They stood on the wide stone ledges carved into the upper face of the mountain, dozens of them, large and scaled and ancient-looking, their bodies hunched low against the bitter wind. Their wings were folded tight against their backs. Their great heads were bowed toward the stone. Some stood alone. Some stood in small groups with their sides pressed together. All of them were making that sound. That deep, resonant, endless sound that had no word for it in any human language but meant only one thing. Something precious was gone. The matriarch stood at the front of them all. Her name among the elders was Mara, though her clan title carried far more weight than any name. She was old, older than most of the trees on the mountain. Her scales had once been a rich, deep bronze, the color of a coin held up to firelight. Now they had faded to a pale, dull gold, worn smooth in places by time and weather. Her wings, when spread, were wide enough to cast a shadow over a small house. But they were folded now, pressed close to her body, and her head was low, and she looked very, very tired. 3 drakelings were missing. They were young, barely past hatching season, still small enough that a grown drake could carry all 3 in one arm. Their scales were soft. Their wings were not yet strong enough for real flight. They had wandered to the lower ledges 3 days ago, just as they sometimes did when the weather was clear and the lower rocks were warm from the afternoon sun. No one had been alarmed at first. Young drakelings wandered. It was normal. It was expected. But then the storm had come. It arrived without warning, the way the worst storms always did in the Frost Peak Range. 1 hour the sky was pale and still. The next, the wind was screaming and the snow was falling so thick and fast that you could not see your own hand in front of your face. By the time the clan realized the 3 young ones had not returned, the blizzard was already a wall of white between the hold and the lower ledges. The warriors had tried. 2 of the strongest flyers in the clan had pushed out into the storm and fought their way down the slope. They came back battered, their wings heavy with ice, their eyes red from the driving snow. They had found nothing. The storm had buried every trail, every scent, every small sound. The drakelings were simply gone, swallowed by the white. For 2 more days the clan had searched on foot along whatever paths could still be walked. They had called out. They had listened. They had spread across the lower slopes in long careful lines, moving slowly, checking every drift and hollow and sheltered corner they could find. Nothing. And so on the morning of the 3rd day, the matriarch had begun the morning rite. It was one of the oldest traditions the clan had. It was not begun quickly or lightly. It was begun only when the elders agreed that hope had reached its end, when the searching was done and the finding had not come. It meant that the clan was letting go. It meant that the young ones were being given back to the mountain, and the mountain would keep them now. The clan cried together. Their voices filled the high cold air and spilled down the slopes in long rolling waves. The sound moved through the pine trees and out across the frozen ground below, traveling farther than such sounds usually traveled, carried by the wind into places far from the mountain. It reached the foothills. It reached the narrow path that wound through the lower forest at the base of the range. It reached a man named Grant. He stopped walking the moment he heard it. Grant was not a large man. He was somewhere in his middle years, with a calm face and careful eyes and the kind of steady hands that came from a long time of doing work that required steadiness. He wore a heavy wool coat that had seen better days, 2 scarves layered around his neck and jaw, and boots that had been repaired so many times that very little of the original boot remained. On his back was a wide leather pack, old and worn but organized with great care, medicines, bandages, small tools, emergency supplies. The pack of a man who understood that being unprepared was its own kind of failure. Grant was a field medic. He had no clinic, no building, no single village he called home. He moved between the remote settlements scattered through the lower ranges, going where he was needed, staying until the work was done, and then moving on to the next place. He had been doing this for many years. He had walked a very great number of cold paths in a very great number of bad storms, and he had learned to read weather and terrain the way other people read words on a page. He knew the Frost Peak Range was not safe in this weather. He knew that the path he was on led away from the mountains, toward the nearest village, toward warmth and a fire and a proper meal. He knew all of this very clearly. He stood in the snow and listened to the sound coming down from the high slopes. It was not wind. Wind did not carry grief. Whatever was making that sound was hurting, and the hurt was real, and it was large, and it had been going on for some time. Grant did not know what Drake sounded like when they mourned. He had never been this close to the Frost Peak Range in winter before. But he knew what loss sounded like. He had been around enough of it in his work to recognize it in any form. He looked up the mountain. The slope rose steep and white above the tree line, disappearing into the gray curtain of falling snow. He looked back down the path toward the village. He looked up again. He tightened the straps of his pack. He pulled his scarf up over his nose. He took one slow breath of frozen air. Then he turned and walked toward the mountain. He did not know what he would find up there. He did not know if he would find anything at all. But the sound had reached inside him and pulled, and Grant had long ago stopped arguing with that feeling. He climbed into the storm. The mountain did not make it easy for him. The path that had been narrow and difficult at the base became something close to impossible higher up. The snow was deep, knee-deep in some places, waist-deep in others where the wind had pushed it into long heavy drifts against the rocks. Every step cost something. Every meter of ground gained required Grant to pull his boot free, find solid footing, test the ground, and push forward again. The wind came at him sideways, cutting through his coat like it was made of paper. He kept moving. He had learned a long time ago that stopping was the most dangerous thing a person could do in weather like this. Not because of the cold alone, though the cold was serious enough. But because stopping gave a person time to think about how bad things were, and thinking too hard about how bad things were had a way of turning legs to stone. So Grant moved. Slowly, carefully, steadily. One step, then the next. The sound from above had faded as the storm thickened around him. He could no longer hear the mournful cries of the clan clearly. Only fragments reached him now, distant, broken by the wind, there for a moment and then gone. But he had fixed the direction in his mind before the sound faded, and he held to it the way a man holds to a rope in dark water. He searched as he climbed. He checked every hollow in the rock face. Every place where the slope flattened slightly and the snow had gathered in deep piles. Every narrow gap between boulders where something small might have taken shelter. He called out, not loudly, not with words that meant anything, just sound, just presence, just the signal that something living was nearby and listening. Nothing answered. He climbed for 2 more hours. His fingers had gone numb inside his gloves. The frostbite was beginning its slow work on his ears and the tip of his nose. His pack felt heavier with every step, though nothing in it had changed. He stopped once to drink from his water flask before it froze solid, ate 2 small pieces of dried bread without tasting them, and kept going. Then he heard it. It was not a cry. It was smaller than that, a thin, weak sound, barely carrying above the noise of the wind. He might have missed it entirely if he had been moving instead of standing still for a moment to check his direction. But he was standing still, and the wind dropped for just a few seconds, and in that brief quiet the sound reached him. He turned toward it. 10 meters to his left, below a long shelf of rock, a massive snowdrift had built up against the slope. It was taller than Grant and wide enough to fill a large room. On its surface it looked like every other drift on the mountain. Smooth, undisturbed, innocent. But the sound had come from inside it. Grant moved to it immediately. He pulled the short folding tool from the side of his pack. He carried it for digging out blocked doorways in buried villages, and he began to work carefully at the lower face of the drift. Not quickly. Quickly was how people collapsed snow onto things buried underneath. Carefully. Layer by layer, testing as he went. He found the first one less than half a meter in. A small scaled body, curled tight, dusted white with snow that had filtered through the gaps in the drift. The drakeling was breathing, shallow and slow, but breathing. Its scales were a pale gray-green, the color of river stones, and its small wings were pressed flat against its sides. It was conscious. Its eyes opened when Grant's hands touched it, and it looked at him, and did not look away. Grant worked faster. The second drakeling was deeper in, another meter back, pressed against the rock face beneath the shelf. This one had a wing bent at an angle that was clearly wrong, not a natural rest position but the sharp, awkward angle of something broken. It was not moving but it was alive, its breath a faint fog in the cold dark space inside the drift. The third was the worst. It was the smallest of the three, tucked behind the other two as if the others had been shielding it. Its scales had taken on a bluish tone at the edges that Grant recognized and did not like at all. Hypothermia. The little body was barely moving, its breathing so slow and shallow that Grant had to press his fingers gently against its side for a long moment before he felt the rise and fall. Alive. But not by much. He did not waste time standing there thinking about it. He pulled the emergency blanket from his pack, thin, silver, designed to hold body heat, and wrapped it around the smallest one first. Then he looked at the space around him and made a fast decision. The drift itself, with its front face now opened, created a natural hollow against the rock. Terrible in a storm if left open. But if he closed the front partially and put a fire at the entrance, it would hold warmth better than anything he could build from scratch. He had 4 pieces of dry kindling left in the waterproof pouch at the bottom of his pack. He had a small block of fire-starting wax, the kind that burned even in wet conditions. He gathered what dry material he could find tucked under the rock shelf, a few dead twigs, a handful of brittle lichen. And he built the smallest fire that could still do the job. It caught. He took off his coat. This was not a comfortable decision. The cold hit him immediately, hard and mean, biting through his 2 wool shirts like they were not there. But the coat went around the 3 drakelings together, bundled as close as he could get them, the emergency blanket underneath and the coat on top. Then Grant pressed himself in close behind them. His body heat was the last tool he had, and he used it. He curled around the small bundle of drakelings the way he had seen mothers curl around sick children in cold village rooms, completely, deliberately, giving every bit of warmth his body could produce. The fire burned low at the entrance. The snow outside continued to fall. The wind pushed at the walls of their small hollow but could not get in. The night was very long. Grant did not sleep. He fed the fire in tiny careful amounts, making it last. He checked each drakeling every little while, breathing, warmth, the color of their scales. The one with the broken wing stirred and made a soft sound twice during the night. The smallest one, the hypothermic one, was slow to respond but by the deep middle of the night its scales had begun to lose that frightening blue tone at the edges. The one with the gray-green scales watched him the entire night. Every time Grant looked up from checking the others or feeding the fire, those eyes were on him. Not frightened anymore. Not confused. Just watching, steady and quiet, in the way that very young creatures sometimes watch things they were trying to understand. Grant did not speak much. He said small quiet things now and then. The kind of things he said to patients who were scared and needed to hear a calm voice more than they needed actual words. It is all right. You are safe. I have you. By the time gray light began to filter through the snow outside, the fire was ash and all three drakelings were warm and breathing steadily. Grant put his coat back on with stiff, slow hands. He repacked what little remained in his pack. He checked each small patient one final time with the careful efficiency of long practice. Broken wing, stable, would need proper setting. Smallest one, color returned, breathing normal. Gray-green one, strong, alert, watching him still. He lifted the smallest one against his chest. The other two pressed close to his legs. He stepped out into the pale cold dawn and began the long slow walk down the mountain. Grant did not see them until he was already surrounded. He had been focused on the ground in front of him. The descent had been harder than the climb in some ways, his legs were shaking from a full night without sleep, his fingers were stiff and slow inside his gloves, and the smallest drakeling pressed against his chest was heavier than it looked. He had been watching each step carefully, making sure his boots found solid ground before shifting his weight, and so he had not been looking up. When he finally did look up, there were 6 of them. They had come down from the tree line on both sides of the path and positioned themselves in a wide half-circle around him without making a sound. Grant stopped walking. He stood very still. The 2 drakelings at his legs pressed closer, one against each boot, and made no sound either. The warriors were enormous. He had seen drakes at a distance before. Most people in the lower ranges had, if they lived close enough to the mountains and had been around long enough. But seeing them at a distance and standing 3 meters from them were 2 completely different experiences. They were tall and broad and heavily scaled, their bodies built in the way that things are built when they have never needed to apologize for taking up space. Their wings were half raised. Not fully open, but lifted enough to make them look even larger than they already were. Their eyes were fixed on Grant with an intensity that made the cold air feel even colder. Not one of them moved. Not one of them spoke. Grant looked at them for a moment. Then he looked down at the sleeping drakeling against his chest. Then he looked back up at the warriors. He took a slow breath. Very carefully, so that no part of the movement could be mistaken for something threatening, he shifted the smallest drakeling in his arms and held it out toward the nearest warrior. The little body was wrapped in his emergency blanket, its small face relaxed in sleep, its breathing slow and even. Alive. Clearly, visibly, unmistakably alive. Grant's voice came out rougher than he intended. A full night of cold and no sleep had done that to it. But the words were simple and clear. They need better care than I can give, he said. The small one is stable but she was hypothermic through the night. The one with the broken wing needs it properly set before it heals wrong. All 3 need warmth and food and someone who knows them. He did not lower his arms. He held the drakeling out and waited. The nearest warrior stared at him. Then its eyes moved to the drakeling. Something shifted in its expression, a change Grant could not fully read but could feel, the way you feel a change in the air before rain arrives. The warrior looked at the 2 drakelings standing pressed against Grant's legs. It looked back at Grant's face. Then it stepped forward and took the sleeping drakeling from him. The transfer was done with a gentleness that surprised Grant slightly, though he did not show it. The warrior held the small creature close to its chest, and for just a moment it bowed its head over the sleeping face with an expression that needed no translation at all. The other warriors had moved. Not toward Grant, they formed up around him, 2 ahead and 2 behind and 1 on each side. An escort, not an attack. Grant understood the difference and was grateful for it. He adjusted his empty arms, looked down at the two drakelings still walking close to his legs, and began to move when the warriors moved. The walk to the base of the mountain hold took a long time. Grant's body was asking him to stop with every step. His legs had moved from shaking to a deep, heavy ache that ran from his ankles to his lower back. The frostbite on his fingers and ears had passed the painful stage and reached the numb stage, which was in some ways worse because it meant he could not tell how bad it was getting. He kept his eyes forward and kept moving because stopping was not an option he was willing to consider until the drakelings were safe. He heard the clan before he saw them. The mourning sound. The same sound that had pulled him up the mountain the day before, was still going. It filtered down through the rocks and trees, deep and low and full of grief. It had not stopped. Of course it had not stopped. They still did not know. The hold itself came into view as the path curved around a wide shoulder of rock. It was built into the mountain face, great carved stone ledges and deep openings in the cliff, older than anything Grant had seen built by human hands. And on the ledges, gathered in long rows with their heads bowed, the clan stood and continued their mourning rite. The matriarch was at the front. Grant recognized her immediately, not because he had seen her before but because of the way the others were positioned around her. She was the center of everything. She was old and weathered and still, and the sound she was making was lower than the others, deeper, coming from somewhere that had been hurting for 3 days. The escort brought Grant forward. One of the warriors spoke, a short, low sound directed at the matriarch. She raised her head. Her eyes found Grant. Then they found the drakeling in the warrior's arms. Then the two small ones walking close at Grant's sides. The mourning sound stopped. It did not fade gradually. It stopped, all of them, all at once, as if something had cut the sound from the air. The silence that followed was so complete and so sudden that Grant felt it physically, like pressure releasing from his ears. Every eye on every ledge was on him. The matriarch came forward. She moved with the careful dignity of something very old and very tired, but she came quickly. She stopped in front of Grant and looked down at him from her full height, and for a long moment she said nothing at all. Her eyes moved over the drakelings, the sleeping one in the warrior's arms, the two pressed close to Grant's legs, the broken wing, the pale scales, all of it. Grant straightened as much as his exhausted body would allow. He spoke quietly and clearly, the way he always spoke when giving a medical report, because clear information given calmly was one of the most useful things a person could offer in a difficult moment. The smallest one was hypothermic when I found them, he said. She is stable now. Temperature is back. She slept through the night and her breathing is normal. The one with the broken wing, it is a clean break, I think, but it needs to be properly set soon before the bone begins to heal on its own. The third one is the strongest of the three. She kept watch through the night. I do not think she needs anything except food and rest and her family. He paused. They were buried in a drift below the east shelf. About halfway up. They were together. I think the older two were keeping the small one covered. The matriarch looked at him for a long moment after he finished. Her expression was something Grant could not put a name to, too large and too layered for a single word. He opened his mouth to say something else. He was not sure what it was going to be. He never found out. His legs made the decision before his mind did. They simply stopped holding him up, quietly and without drama, and Grant went down into the snow in a slow sideways fold, his pack hitting the ground beside him, his eyes closing before he landed. The last thing he was aware of was the warmth of something very large and very gentle curling close around him. Grant woke up warm. This was unexpected enough that it took him a moment to understand it. His last clear memory was cold, deep, bone-level cold that had been sitting inside him for so long that he had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a sound that has been going on too long. And now it was gone. He was warm. Not just surface warm, not the fragile warmth of a thin blanket over cold skin, but genuinely, thoroughly warm in the way that only happens when something has been working hard for a long time to make it so. He opened his eyes slowly. The ceiling above him was stone, dark, smooth, carved rather than natural, rising in a gentle curve overhead. The room he was in was large by any standard, with walls that caught the light of several small fires burning in shallow carved hollows around the edges. The air smelled of something he could not name, something dry and mineral and faintly warm, like rocks that had been sitting in sunlight for a long time. He was lying on a thick bed of what appeared to be packed moss and dry grass covered with heavy woven material. His coat was gone. His boots were gone. His pack was beside him, closed and untouched. His hands, when he lifted them slowly to look, were wrapped in something soft and dark, treated, he realized. The frostbite had been cleaned and covered. His ears felt the same way. Whoever had done it knew what they were doing. He tried to sit up. Something shifted against his left side. He looked down. The smallest drakeling was pressed against him, her small scaled body tucked close along his ribs, her head resting on his arm. Her eyes were open. She had been watching him sleep. When his eyes met hers she made a sound, very small, very soft, something between a hum and a breath, and pressed closer. Grant looked at her for a moment. "Hello," he said quietly. She blinked. Did not move away. Did not look away. He sat up carefully, slowly, trying not to disturb her more than necessary. She repositioned as he moved, keeping contact with his side, and when he was fully upright she was pressed against his leg instead of his ribs, warm and solid and entirely certain about where she wanted to be. Grant looked around the room more carefully. There was food near him, a clay bowl of something warm, still steaming faintly. He ate it without questioning what it was. It was good. He ate all of it. He was on his second careful look around the room when the elder came in. She was not the matriarch. She was smaller, older looking if that was possible, with scales that had faded almost entirely to a pale silver gray. She moved slowly but her eyes were sharp. She looked at Grant, then at the drakeling pressed against his leg, and then back at Grant with an expression he could not quite read. She spoke. Her voice was low and measured, and after a moment Grant realized she was speaking his language. Carefully, with the deliberate precision of someone who had learned it a long time ago and used it rarely. "You have slept for most of a day," she said. "I needed it," Grant said. "Yes." She looked again at the drakeling. "She has not moved from your side since you were brought in. We attempted to move her twice. She refused." Grant looked down at the small creature against his leg. "Is that unusual?" The elder was quiet for a moment. "It is called an imprint bond," she said finally. "It is rare. It does not happen often. When it does, it is considered sacred among our kind." She paused. "It has never happened with a human before." Grant absorbed this information quietly. "What does it mean for her?" he asked. He asked about the drakeling first because that was the question that mattered most to him. The elder studied him. "It means she has chosen you as her primary bond. Her safe place. The one she trusts above all others in the world." Another pause. "It is not something that can be undone. It is not something we would undo even if we could. But it creates a situation that the elders must discuss." Grant nodded slowly. "I understand." The council was held that same evening. Grant was brought into a larger chamber, much larger, with a high ceiling and wide stone benches arranged in a half circle. 7 elders sat on the benches. The matriarch sat at the center. Grant stood in the open space before them, and the smallest drakeling stood pressed against his leg, and no amount of gentle encouragement from anyone had convinced her to move even slightly farther away. The debate that followed was serious. Grant could not understand all of it, much of it was conducted in the clan's own language, deep and resonant and full of sounds he had no frame of reference for. But the elder who had spoken to him earlier translated the main points in quiet, careful words while the debate went on. A human had never held an imprint bond. Humans were short-lived. Humans were unpredictable. The clan had no history with humans, no framework for trusting them with something this sacred. What happened to the bond when the human died, as humans did, far too quickly? What happened to the young one then? Who was responsible? Who could guarantee anything? The questions were not unreasonable. Grant listened to all of them without interrupting. One elder in particular, broad-shouldered, dark-scaled, with the look of someone who had held strong opinions for a very long time, spoke at length and with considerable feeling. Grant did not need a translation to understand the tone. Doubt. Resistance. The firm belief that this situation was a problem that needed to be corrected. When the debate paused, the matriarch looked at Grant directly. She spoke in his language. Her voice was low and very steady. "Tell us," she said. "Why did you climb the mountain?" The chamber was quiet. Every elder was watching him. Grant looked at the matriarch. Then he looked around at the elders, one by one, taking his time. Then he looked down at the small drakeling pressed against his leg, her eyes turned up to his face with that steady, patient attention she had given him since the night in the snow. He looked back up. "I heard them crying," he said. "I did not know what was making the sound. I did not know what I would find. I just knew that something was in pain, and I could not walk away from that." He said it simply. No decoration. No performance. Just the words as they were. The chamber was very quiet. The dark-scaled elder who had spoken with such force a few minutes before said nothing. He looked at Grant for a long moment, then looked away, and did not speak again. One by one the others were quiet too. The matriarch held Grant's gaze for a long time. Her expression was unreadable in the way that things are unreadable when they contain too much to show all at once. Then she nodded. Slowly. Once. The council was over. The ceremony was held at dawn. Grant had not been told what to expect. The elder who had spoken to him, the silver-scaled one with the sharp eyes, had come to his room before the light came up and told him simply to come, and to bring nothing, and to leave the pack behind. Grant had looked at her for a moment, then looked down at the small drakeling pressed against his leg as she had been all night, and asked if she should come too. The elder had looked at the drakeling. Then back at Grant. "She will come whether we say so or not," she said. She was right. They walked through the stone corridors of the hold in the grey pre-dawn quiet, the elder leading, Grant following, and the small drakeling moving close at his left side with the calm certainty of something that had already decided where it belonged. The corridors were wide and smooth and lit by the same small fires in carved wall hollows that Grant had seen in his room. Occasionally another clan member passed them going the other way and stopped to watch Grant move through their home. Not with hostility. With something closer to careful curiosity, the way people look at something they are still making up their minds about. The ceremony chamber was the largest room Grant had seen in the hold. It was not the council chamber. This one was older, he could feel the age of it in the way the stone looked, worn smooth by an enormous amount of time and use. The ceiling was high enough that the upper part of it was in shadow. The walls were covered in markings, carved deep into the stone, filled in places with pigment that had faded to soft earth colors over what must have been centuries. Grant did not know what the markings said, but he could feel their weight. This was a room where important things had happened for a very long time. The clan was gathered. Not just the elders. All of them. They stood along the walls and on the wide shallow steps that rose on three sides of the room, tier after tier of scaled bodies in the dim morning light, their eyes all turned toward the center of the floor where Grant now stood. He had not expected this. The sheer number of them, all quiet, all watching, made the room feel full in a way that had nothing to do with its size. The matriarch stood at the far end of the chamber. She was not wearing anything different. She had no crown, no decoration, no object in her hands. She did not need any of those things to fill the space she occupied. She stood with the simple, complete authority of something that had been at the center of this clan for longer than most things in these mountains had been standing, and the room arranged itself around her the way water arranges itself around a stone. Grant walked toward her. The Drakeling walked with him. When he reached the center of the floor, the matriarch looked down at him for a long moment without speaking. Then she began. She spoke in the old language first. Her voice filled the chamber completely, low and resonant, and the clan listened in total silence. Grant understood none of the words, but he listened to them anyway because the sound of them was serious and careful and full of something that deserved attention. She spoke for several minutes. At certain points the clan made a sound together, a single low tone, brief, like a response in a ceremony Grant had no name for. Then she switched to his language. Grant, she said. His name in her voice was a simple thing, but it landed with weight. What you did on this mountain 3 days ago has no easy translation in our old tongue. We do not have a word for a stranger who climbs into a storm for creatures he does not know, with no promise of safety and no reason that serves himself. She paused. So we will give you the word we use for those who have earned the deepest trust of this clan. She spoke a word in the old language. It was 2 syllables, low and round, and it moved through the room like something with mass. Ward Keeper, the elder beside Grant, translated quietly. It is the oldest title we have. It has been given fewer times than I have years. It means you are recognized as a protector of our young. It means every Drake in every territory that knows this clan will know what you are and what you did. Grant stood very still. The matriarch stepped forward. She was carrying something in her hand that Grant had not noticed before, a small instrument, narrow, with a dark handle worn smooth with age. She spoke again and the elder translated. The mark is given on the back of the left hand. It will not fade. It does not wash away. It is not painful, or not very. A pause. She says to hold still. Grant held out his left hand. The matriarch worked with the careful precision of long practice. The mark took shape in less time than Grant expected. A clean, angular symbol, small enough to sit within the width of his hand, made of 2 lines that curved toward each other without quite meeting and a third short line that crossed them both. When she finished, she held his hand for a moment and looked at the mark, and then she looked at him. The clan made that low sound again. All of them together. It moved through Grant's chest like a second heartbeat. Then the matriarch looked down at the Drakeling. She spoke gently. The Drakeling looked up at her with those steady eyes and made a small sound back. The matriarch reached down and touched the top of the small head very lightly with one careful claw, and said something soft that the elder did not translate. Grant did not ask what it was. Some things were not for him. Her name, the elder said after a moment, is Vale. It means small fire in the old tongue. The matriarch has formally placed her in your care for the bonding period. 2 of our clan will travel with you both, to guide you in her needs and to ensure her safety during the time when the bond is still new and she is still young. The elder paused. This is not a small thing she is giving you. She wants you to understand that. I understand, Grant said quietly. I will not treat it as a small thing. The elder looked at him for a moment. Then she made a sound that might, in some way, have been the closest thing she had to a smile. The walk out of the hold was different from the walk in. The clan did not crowd him or press close. But as Grant moved through the corridor toward the wide stone entrance, the one standing along the walls watched him pass and made that low sound, not all at once this time but one by one, as he passed each of them, like a long slow wave moving through the room behind him. Outside the mountain the dawn had arrived fully. The sky was pale and clear for the first time in days. The storm had passed in the night and left the world clean and white and very still. The snow on the slopes caught the early light and held it, and the air was cold but honest cold, the kind that woke you up rather than the kind that wore you down. Grant stood at the entrance of the hold and looked out at it. Vale pressed close against his left leg. On either side of them, 2 Drake escorts waited with calm patience, ready for whatever came next. Grant pulled his coat straight, adjusted the straps of his pack, and looked down at the small Drakeling beside him. She looked up at him. That steady, quiet, entirely certain gaze that had watched him through a long cold night and had not looked away since. He took a slow breath of clean morning air. Then he walked down the mountain. Behind him the Frost Peak hold was silent. No mourning cries. No grief rolling down the slopes and through the trees. Only the soft sound of snow settling and the distant call of a bird somewhere in the white pines below. It was the most peaceful sound Grant had heard in 3 days. He carried it all the way down.